You have 48 hours to vacate this structure, or I will have it condemned and bulldozed myself." She said it loud enough for the whole county road to hear, loud enough for the two men she had brought with her, clipboard men in matching polo shirts who had never poured a concrete footer in their lives, to hear and nod and feel important. She said it the way people say things when they have never once been told no, like it was already done, like the man standing in front of her was already gone. He didn't move. He was standing on the porch of a farmhouse that had been in his family for 61 years, wearing work boots caked with the same red clay Georgia mud his grandfather had turned by hand before the man was born. And he did not flinch. He looked at her the way you look at a storm you've been watching build from a long way off. Patient, still, measuring. He said, "Ma'am, you are on private property. I'd ask you to leave." She laughed, not a big laugh, a short, dismissive sound. "Not for long, sweetheart." Nobody said a word. The two clipboard men studied their clipboards. The neighbors who had drifted to their porches and fence lines when the silver SUV turned off the county road, they stood there watching. Quiet, she had absolutely no idea who she was talking to. She had no idea that the man she had just called sweetheart, the man she'd dismissed with a wave of her hand like something that needed to be cleared out, had spent 22 years working for the Federal Bureau of Investigation in jobs that most people in this country will never know existed. In 11 minutes, everything about her life that she thought was settled was going to come apart. Have you ever been looked at like you don't belong somewhere that is yours? Have you ever had someone stand on your own ground and tell you what it was worth? Let me take you back. 14 months before that morning, the land sits 7 miles east of Millhaven, Georgia, down a county road that most GP systems still haven't cataloged. 412 acres of red clay farmland, creek bottom, mature timber, and the kind of silence that only comes from places where the earth remembers being worked. There is a pond in the southwest corner where largemouth bass hold in the shadow of an old willow tree. There is a fence line running along the southern border, cedar posts set true, stretched tight, that has held exactly where it was put for more than 50 years. There is a stand of longleaf pine on the high ground to the north that a man named Ernest James Calhoun planted in 1963, not because he had to, because he believed the trees would outlast him, and he believed the trees deserved to be there. He was right on both counts. The trees are still there. Marcus Calhoun had grown up on that land the way children grow up in places that form the permanent core of who they are. He had walked those fields before he could read, following his grandfather in the early morning, learning the names of things, the difference between loam and hardpan, the way the creek ran dark and fast after a hard rain, which fence posts needed pressure-treated wood and which ones could get by with cedar, where the bass held in summer heat and where they moved in the cool of October. Ernest Calhoun was not a talkative man, but the things he said were precise, and the things he did were deliberate, and Marcus had learned from the example of both. The farmhouse itself had been built in 1927 by Marcus's great-grandfather, a man who had purchased 12 acres with money saved from 12 years of work and who had raised 7 children in that house and who had been buried, when the time came, on that same land underneath a cedar tree he had planted himself. Every generation of the family had added to the 412 acres or improved what was already there. Every generation had treated it not as an investment but as a testimony, evidence of what the family was and what it had endured and what it had chosen to build anyway. Ernest had purchased the full parcel, the 412 acres, in 1961. This was not a simple thing, this was not a casual thing. In Georgia in 1961, a black man buying that much land required something beyond money. It required 11 years of 6-day weeks at the cotton compress in Millhaven. It required Saturday fieldwork through springs and summers and falls. It required 3 bank rejections and a 4th banker who had served alongside a man named Calhoun in the Pacific Theater and who felt, in the way of things that happen sideways in history, that he owed something. Marcus knew all of this. He had been told the story so many times it lived in his chest rather than his head. He knew the name of the loan officer. He knew which bank. He knew how many acres had cost how much and what the payment terms were and how long it took his grandfather to pay it off. He knew these things the way he knew the longleaf pines and the bass in the pond, as facts that were also truths. He had left the farm at 19. Georgia State, then the FBI Academy at Quantico. Then 22 years of work that took him from field cases in Atlanta to assignments he was not permitted to discuss, and conferences in Washington where he sat in rooms with people whose names appeared in news stories and who in those rooms behaved differently than they behaved in front of cameras. He had worked counterintelligence. He had worked public corruption. He had sat across small tables from men who ran significant things and men who only thought they did, and he had learned to read a room the way his grandfather had taught him to read a field, carefully, slowly, without announcing what he was doing. He retired in March. Quietly, no party. A handshake from the special agent in charge, a letter in a frame he put in a box. And then a long drive south down I-75, and then off the highway, and then down the county road, and then he parked his truck in front of the farmhouse that smelled like cedar and old iron, and the particular dust of a place that has not been changed in a very long time, and he sat down in the cane back chair on the porch, the same chair Ernest had sat in every evening of his adult life, and looked out at the longleaf pines and the pond and the cedar fence posts running true along the southern line. For the first time in a long time, he felt like himself. He had plans. The farmhouse needed work. The roof over the back bedroom had settled along one rafter and needed resheathing. 2 of the porch boards had gone soft, and one was beginning to cup. The pump house needed a new pressure tank, and one of the delivery lines needed to be rerouted. The south field hadn't been planted in 3 years and needed to be turned and amended before winter rye could go in. The dock on the pond had a pier section that had rotted at the joists and needed to be rebuilt from the cross members up. He made lists. He bought cedar planks and pressure-treated 4x4s and bags of lime and a new pressure tank still in the box. He moved through the work the way Ernest had moved through work, methodically, without hurry, one job completed before the next one was opened. The kitchen still had the cast-iron pans on the wall where his grandmother had hung them. The pantry still had the shelf where Ernest kept his sharpening stones and his leather punch and the small jar of beeswax he used for tool handles. The front room still had the fireplace with the brick mantel his grandfather had laid himself, and on that mantel, in the center, was a small wooden box that had been worn smooth by 60 years of handling. The box was made of walnut. It had a small brass clasp, and the inside was lined with blue velvet that had faded over the decades to something close to gray. Inside the box, nestled into that velvet, were Ernest James Calhoun's service medals from Korea. 2 bronze stars, one for valor during the Chosin Reservoir, one for action near Heartbreak Ridge, and a unit citation from the 24th Infantry Regiment. Marcus touched that box every morning when he came through the front room. Not to open it, just to touch it. The way you put your hand on something solid when the ground shifts under you. The way you reach for evidence that certain things were real. He had been home 6 weeks when the first letter arrived. It came from something called the Millhaven County Harmonious Living Association. He had never heard of it. It was printed on heavy cream paper with a small crest at the top, a laurel arch around an illustration of a house, and it informed him, in very formal language, that his property had been flagged for multiple violations of the association's residential property standards and that he was required to schedule a compliance inspection within 30 days or face a fine of $500 per day. Of non-compliance. Marcus set the letter on the kitchen table. He read it twice. Then he did what he had spent 22 years being paid to do. He started looking. The Millhaven County Harmonious Living Association had been incorporated 14 months earlier. Its registered agent was a downtown law firm whose senior partner was the brother-in-law of the Millhaven County Commission Chair. It claimed jurisdiction, in documents filed with the state, over a significant portion of eastern Millhaven County, including rural farmland and timber tracts that had never been part of any homeowners association, had never voted to join one, had no recorded restrictive covenants in their deeds, and had no legal basis for being subject to association rules whatsoever. The association's claimed jurisdiction covered 47 properties. 31 of them were black-owned. Many of those 31 went back 3 and 4 generations. He also found this. 2 of those properties had already been seized. The owners, both elderly women living alone, one 78 and one 81, had received association fines they didn't know how to dispute. The fines had accumulated. The association had converted them to liens through a county magistrate process that moved very fast. The liens had been foreclosed. Both properties had been acquired at auction by a development LLC whose registered address was a mailbox store on Peachtree Road in Buckhead. The LLC had filed a preliminary subdivision site plan called Millhaven Estates Phase 1. He sat in the kitchen with the documents spread across the table and the percolator going on the stove and the light coming through the window the way it came through that window in the morning, and he thought about his grandfather at the cotton compress. He thought about the bank that said no 3 times. He thought about a woman who was 78 years old and alone and received letters on cream paper from an organization with a crest and did not know she could say no. He called a former colleague in the Atlanta field office that afternoon. He kept his voice level. He described what he had found. He said, "I think I'm looking at the edge of something larger." His colleague said, "Marcus, send me the documents. I'm going to make some calls." He also wrote back to the association. A formal letter, certified mail, he cited the specific statutes under Georgia property law by which their claimed jurisdiction was void. He cited the absence of recorded covenants. He named the relevant case law. He was very precise. 3 days later, a second letter arrived. It informed him that an inspection had been scheduled for his property on a specific date, with or without his consent, and that failure to cooperate would result in a referral for emergency condemnation proceedings. Marcus stood at the kitchen counter and read it. He folded it and put it with the other documents. He went out to the porch and looked at the longleaf pines for a while. Then he made 2 more calls. The first was to his former supervisor, a woman named Lynette Morrow, who had been promoted to special agent in charge of the Atlanta field office in the 2 years since Marcus had served under her. She listened. Then she said, "How many properties are you saying?" He said, 47 claimed, 31 known minority owned, 2 already seized. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Marcus, we've been seeing this in 3 other counties, different names, same structure." He said, "I know, that's why I'm calling you instead of just the county sheriff." The second call was to Diane Worthy, 30 years of civil rights property litigation. She had been named in a Georgia Bar Journal profile as the person you call when the system pretends to be broken but is actually working exactly as intended. He told her everything. She listened for 12 minutes without interrupting. Then she said, "Send me everything tonight. I'll file for an emergency injunction by Thursday." She paused. "You said you want to be there when they come." He said, "I do." She said, "So will I." The inspection date was 14 days out. He spent those 14 days carefully and quietly and with complete deliberateness. He was no longer a working agent. But certain things about 22 years of that work don't simply expire. The knowledge of how evidence is built doesn't expire. The understanding of what patterns look like and what they mean and how to document them in ways that will hold up in a federal proceeding, that doesn't expire. The relationships don't expire. He also, in those 14 days, fixed the soft porch boards. He replaced the pressure tank in the pump house. He turned and amended half of the south field. He did these things because they needed doing, and because Ernest had always said that the work you do on your own property while you're waiting for something is not separate from what you're waiting for. It is part of the same thing. On the morning of the inspection, he was up before the sun. He made coffee in his grandfather's percolator. He ironed the blue shirt, the one his grandmother had bought him the last Christmas she was alive for church, and which still fit him, and which he wore only for things that mattered. He laced his work boots. He sat on the porch in Ernest's cane-back chair and watched the longleaf pines go from black to green as the light came up. The silver SUV arrived at 9:14. 3 people got out of it. The driver was a man in a polo shirt with a clipboard and the studied expression of someone performing authority he didn't actually possess. The second man, also in a polo shirt, had a camera out before his feet touched the gravel. And the woman who stepped from the passenger seat, taking a moment to adjust her blazer and her expression before she looked toward the farmhouse, was Renata Holloway Birch. She was the executive director of the Millhaven County Harmonious Living Association. She had held similar positions in 2 other counties and had been removed from one of them following a discrimination lawsuit she settled without admitting wrongdoing, which is the legal equivalent of a person apologizing by saying they apologize for whatever you think you feel. She was in her mid-50s, dressed for an office, and she walked with the particular stride of a person who has confused institutional authority for personal power and has never been corrected on this point. She walked directly through the fence gate, his grandfather's gate, cedar frame, iron latch, without pausing. She walked up his driveway the way people walk through spaces that belong to them. Marcus watched her from the porch. He did not move. She stopped at the base of the porch steps and looked up at him. "Mr. Calhoun, Renata Holloway Birch, Harmonious Living Association. You received our notice of inspection. We're here to conduct the scheduled compliance survey. I'll need access to the primary structure and the outbuildings." He said, "Good morning. I've already communicated in writing that this association has no legal jurisdiction over this property, and I have not consented to any inspection. I need you to leave." She tilted her head. "I understand you're frustrated. I do. But the association has been formally recognized by the county, and our authority to conduct these inspections is established in, ma'am." He said it without raising his voice. "I've read the documents you're citing. The county did not grant what you're claiming. There are no recorded covenants on this property. There never have been." She smiled. A small, managed smile, the smile of a person whose plan involves waiting the other person out. She said, "Well, Marcus," she said it like a correction, "dropping the mister the way you drop something you've decided you don't need, perhaps we can let the county magistrate sort out the legal questions. For now, we just need to document the property condition. It's really very straightforward." She glanced at the house, at the barn behind it, at the porch boards he had just finished replacing. "The structure has some visible concerns we'll need to catalog." The second clipboard man had started toward the barn. He was 40 feet away and moving. She turned toward the front door like the conversation was over. Marcus said, "I'd ask you not to enter the house." She turned the handle and pushed the door open. She was inside for less than 30 seconds. When she came back out, she was holding the box. She had it in both hands, turned over, examining the brass clasp like she was pricing it. The walnut box that had lived on that mantel for 61 years. The box with the blue velvet lining. The box that had held 2 bronze stars and a unit citation from a war that Ernest Calhoun had survived and come home from and never spoke about at length and was enormously proud of in the way of men who do not perform their pride. She said, looking at the clasp, not at Marcus, "What is all this? Some old military items?" She turned it again. These could present a documentation concern. "Metal oxidation in a residential," he said, "put it back." She looked up. She had the expression of someone who has not been told to put something back in a very long time. She said, "I'm going to need to log these for the inspection record," he said. And later, every person who was there would remember the quality of the quiet in his voice, he said. "That box contains the service medals of Corporal Ernest James Calhoun, United States Army, Korea. He received those decorations for valor in combat, and he built this house with his own hands, and that box has been on that mantel since before I was born. And you are going to place it back exactly where you found it." She looked at him over the box. Then she said, without the smile this time, with something closer to contempt, "You have 48 hours to vacate this structure, or I will have it condemned and bulldozed myself." And she set the box down on the porch railing. Not on the mantel, on the railing. She set it there the way you set down something you have already decided is worthless. Carelessly, without looking at where she was putting it. It went over the edge. The box hit the porch floor and the old brass clasp gave way and the lid swung open and the metals slid out onto the weathered boards. 2 bronze stars and the unit citation lying on the floor of the porch in the morning light on the porch his grandfather built. She watched them fall. She did not reach for them. She stepped over them and walked down the porch steps toward the silver SUV. 48 hours, she said, not looking back. Marcus stood still for a moment. Then he crouched down there on that porch, and he picked up each medal one at a time. He set them back in the box. He closed the clasp as far as it would go, which was not all the way now. He stood up. He took his phone out of his pocket. He looked at the end of the drive where the SUV was turning around. He made a call. He said, "It's time." There are moments that look like endings. The door closes, the powerful person drives away, the person left behind stands in the quiet and holds whatever they managed to keep. The world has a habit of framing those moments as conclusions, as proof of something, as evidence of where things stand. People who use power carelessly are counting on that misreading. They are counting on the person left standing to believe that the story is over. But what Renata Holloway Birch did not know, could not have known, because she had looked at Marcus Calhoun and decided she already knew what he was that the story had started 11 days ago. And the clock she didn't know was running had just reached zero. Ernest James Calhoun was born in Mill Haven, Georgia in 1929. His father had been a sharecropper. His grandfather had been born into slavery and had lived to own the 40 acres he farmed, which was an act of will so extraordinary that the family had treated it ever since as something close to Scripture. Ernest had grown up understanding land the way some people understand language, not as a subject but as the medium everything else happened in. He went to Korea at 21 with the 24th Infantry Regiment and came back at 23 with 2 Bronze Stars and a silence about certain things that he kept for the rest of his life. He went to work at the cotton compress in Millhaven 6 days a week, and he put his money somewhere safe and let it accumulate with the patience of a man who has decided what he is building toward. 11 years. Then the 412 acres. He had done all of this. Marcus had come to understand, not only for himself, he had done it as an argument. A piece of evidence against a particular kind of claim that was being made in that era and in that place about what certain people were worth and what they were entitled to have. He was making a counter-argument in the only language the argument would accept, in land, in deeds, in fences set true, in long-leaf pines that would be standing when everyone who doubted him was gone. He had sent Marcus to school and then encouraged him, with the gravity of a man who believed it in his marrow, to go into federal service. Not because it was prestigious. Because he said, "I want somebody in this family to understand from the inside how the machine works. So when somebody tries to use the machine on us, we know exactly what they're doing." Marcus had done that. He had spent 22 years learning the machine. He had also spent 22 years building a set of relationships that are particular to people who do that work at a high level for a long time. The kind of relationships that cross agencies and jurisdictions and that are activated by a phone call that says, "I think I'm looking at something that's bigger than one property." 11 days before the morning on the porch, Special Agent in Charge Lynette Morrow had authorized a preliminary inquiry. Federal, not state. Public corruption and civil rights. 4 investigators had been working quietly for 11 days, building the document architecture that holds up in a federal prosecution. Diane Worthy had filed an emergency injunction and had also begun the deposition process for the 2 families who had already lost their properties. And Marcus, retired technically, without any official role in what was unfolding, had done what he was actually very good at, which was organizing information and knowing when it was ready. It was ready. The 48 hours that Renata Holloway Birch had given Marcus expired on a Wednesday morning at 9 o'clock, and she came back. The silver SUV. The same 2 clipboard men. An additional vehicle this time, a flatbed truck with the county logo on the door, and 2 workers in orange safety vests who had apparently been told they were here to begin removal of an illegal structure. And a white sedan with a county magistrate's court seal that contained a process server retained to deliver emergency condemnation papers. She pulled up to the fence line. She looked at the farmhouse. There were 4 additional vehicles already parked along the county road. A dark blue SUV with federal government plates, 2 black sedans, also government plates, and a silver Audi that belonged to Diane Worthy, who was standing at the fence line in a charcoal suit, with a leather portfolio under her arm and an expression that could only be described as ready. Renata Holloway Birch got out of her SUV. She looked at the vehicles. She looked at Diane Worthy. She looked at the farmhouse. where Marcus stood on the porch with the wooden box in his hands. Walking from the dark blue SUV toward the gate were 3 people, all in dark professional clothing, all with credentials on lanyards that caught the morning light. The woman in front reached the gate first. She was perhaps 50 years old, with gray threaded through dark hair and the particular stillness of someone who has conducted a very large number of consequential conversations and has stopped needing to perform authority because she simply has it. She opened the gate and came through it and stopped 12 feet from Renata Holloway Birch and said, at a normal speaking volume, "Without any theater, Miss Holloway Birch. I'm Special Agent in Charge Lynette Morrow, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Atlanta Field Office. These are Special Agents Webb and Estaves. We have a federal warrant for the seizure of business records pertaining to the Millhaven County Harmonious Living Association and 14 related entities. We also have a warrant for your arrest. The charges include wire fraud, civil rights conspiracy under 42 U.S.C. Section 1985, and conspiracy to deprive persons of federally protected property rights across a pattern of conduct affecting at least 31 known victims in Millhaven County. You have the right to remain silent." Renata Holloway Birch's face went the color of uncooked pastry. She looked past Agent Morrow. She looked at Marcus standing on the porch, the box in his hands, the morning light on the longleaf pines behind the house. He looked back at her. He did not smile. He did not say anything. He just looked at her the way his grandfather had taught him to look at things that needed to be clearly understood, steadily, without wavering, without any performance of how he felt. She looked away first. The process server had gotten out of his white sedan and was standing on the roadside holding his condemnation papers and looking at the federal agents and then at the papers and then at the federal agents again. He got back in his car. The flatbed truck with the county logo was already pulling a U-turn. The 2 clipboard men stood by the silver SUV for about 40 seconds. Then they walked away in opposite directions. No one stopped them. Their turn would come later, and it did, but this morning they were not important enough to delay. Diane Worthy came through the gate and said pleasantly to no one in particular and everyone at once, "Good morning." The reckoning that followed was not fast. Federal cases are not fast. They are built the way Ernest built fence lines, post by post, measured, level, meant to hold in all weather. But this one held. The association's documents once seized told the full story in spreadsheets and emails and internal memos that used language so frank it would later be read aloud in a Senate hearing. The mechanism was straightforward: letters sent to properties with no legal obligation to comply, fines levied, fines converted to liens through a compliant magistrate, liens foreclosed, properties acquired. The concentration of that targeting on black-owned rural land in Millhaven County was not incidental and was documented in a series of internal communications that used the phrase legacy properties as a euphemism in a way that made the federal prosecutor's job significantly easier. The 47 properties the association claimed jurisdiction over, 31 black-owned. 9 families had paid between $1,400 and $11,000 in fines, believing the association's claimed authority was real. 2 families had lost their properties entirely. Those 2 properties were at the center of a federal civil forfeiture reversal that took 90 days and that Diane Worthy described at the press conference, announcing it as the absolute minimum justice available, and the beginning of more. She said that with the flat affect of a person who means exactly what she says, and the reporters in the room wrote it down. Both properties were returned to their families, deeds restored, possession transferred. The 81-year-old woman, whose name was Coretta Simmons and whose family had owned their land since 1948, stood on her porch the day the deed was returned and said nothing for a long time. Then, she said, "My mother always said this land would be here when we needed it." She was quiet again. Then she said, she was right. The development LLC was traced through 3 layers of shell entities to a partnership that included the county commission chair's brother-in-law, 2 city council members, and a former county building inspector who had signed off on the condemnation referrals that enabled the forfeitures. The commission chair resigned 11 days after the arrests. The 2 city council members followed within the week. The building inspector chose cooperation, which was the right decision for him personally and a useful one for the prosecution. The senior partner of the law firm that had served as the association's registered agent was disbarred following a state bar proceeding that lasted 4 months. He did not contest the disbarment. His statement through his attorney was 3 sentences long and contained the word regret twice, which is a word that is easy to say when the alternative is a perjury charge. Renata Holloway Birch pled guilty to 2 federal counts, civil rights conspiracy and wire fraud. Her sentencing hearing lasted most of a morning. The federal district judge who presided had served on the bench for 19 years and was known for a particular kind of quiet in the courtroom when she was about to say something she wanted precisely on the record. She found that quiet before she read the sentence. She said, "The harm done to these families is not measured only in property value. It is measured in what was nearly taken, land that represents not economic value alone, but the labor and testimony and endurance of generations." The sentence imposed today reflects the gravity of what was attempted and what was, through the diligence of investigators and counsel and one retired federal agent who refused to look the other way, interrupted before it could be completed. 41 months, $2.3 million in restitution. She sat at the defense table and looked at nothing. She had come into that courtroom with the posture of a person who is still making calculations, and somewhere during the reading of the sentence she had stopped making calculations. Marcus was not in the courtroom. He was at the farm. He was building the dock on the pond, the one he had planned to rebuild since the first week he was home. He was using cedar planks, which is what Ernest would have used, and he was working in the order his grandfather had taught him: posts first, then cross members, then planking. Each board set with a small, deliberate gap for drainage and expansion. It was a clear November morning. The bass were moving in the shallows near the willow. The longleaf pines on the high ground had gone the deep, particular green they go in November, which is different from their summer green, quieter, more settled. His phone rang. It was Diane Worthy. She said, 41 months, $2.3 million. He said, "Good," she said. "The restitution goes to a fund. We need to set up the administration." He said, "I know. I've been thinking about that." He had been thinking about it since August, since the morning he stood on the porch and picked up the medals one at a time. 60 days after the sentencing, the Ernest James Calhoun Land Heritage Fund was incorporated as a nonprofit under Georgia law. Its mission, stated in the founding documents, was the legal protection, historical preservation, and financial support of minority-owned agricultural and rural properties in Millhaven County and the surrounding region. It would provide pro bono legal counsel to landowners facing fraudulent claims. It would offer low-interest emergency loans for property tax assistance, the kind of sudden, unexpected tax bill that is one of the most common mechanisms by which families lose land they've held for decades. And it would maintain a formal archive of deeds, family histories, land records, and oral histories for Black-owned rural properties across the county going back to Reconstruction. This last element was the one Marcus had thought hardest about and had taken the longest to explain to the attorneys who helped set up the nonprofit, because the archive was not, in his view, ancillary to the fund's legal mission. It was the legal mission, what the association had been counting on beyond fear, beyond legal confusion. Beyond the general difficulty of fighting a well-resourced institution when you are not well-resourced was the vulnerability of unrecorded history. Families who couldn't prove continuous ownership because no one had ever helped them build the documentation. Deeds recorded in the wrong name, or in a name that had changed with a marriage that was not documented, or recorded only in memory and the word of the people who were there. The archive was the answer to that vulnerability. It was Ernest's argument continued. The fund's office was in the farmhouse, the front room, with a desk and 2 filing cabinets and a computer and the window that looked out at the longleaf pines. The staff, in the first year, was 3 people: a property attorney just out of his clerkship who had read about the case and called Diane Worthy to ask if there was work to do, an archivist who had spent 8 years at the Georgia State Archives and who understood how to build a record that would survive, and a community outreach coordinator named Felicia Tate, who drove a pickup truck with the fund's name on the magnetic sign on the door and went to churches and senior centers and Grange halls and farm kitchen tables and said, in a way that people trusted, "Tell me about your land. Let's write it down." In the first 18 months, the fund provided assistance to 61 families. 14 received legal representation. 22 received tax assistance loans. 47 completed formal archival documentation of their property histories, some of which went back to land grants issued during Reconstruction that had never been formally recorded in the county system. Marcus served as board chair. He was good at it, in the same way he had been good at the work that preceded it, methodically, without theater, with a clear understanding of what mattered and what was decoration. He traveled to the capital twice to testify before legislative committees on rural property rights and the mechanics of land fraud. He was precise in those hearings. He did not editorialize. He said what the evidence showed and what the evidence required. And several of the legislators who heard him said afterward that they had not fully understood before that morning what was happening to rural property ownership in their state. On the wall of the office above the desk was a framed copy of the original 1961 deed by which Ernest James Calhoun purchased 412 acres of Millhaven County, Georgia next to it. In a small display case with a glass front were the 2 bronze stars and the unit citation mounted on new blue velvet, properly lit. The wooden box sat on the corner of the desk. Its clasp had been repaired by a jeweler in Millhaven, a man who did not charge for the work once he was told what had happened. The velvet inside had been replaced with velvet of the same color the original had been before decades of handling faded it. The medals were in the case on the wall now, where they could be seen, where they meant what they were meant to mean. But Marcus kept the box on the desk. He touched it in the morning. The habit of it remained. Some habits are built into the hands. In the spring of the fund's second year, a woman came to the office. She was 73 years old and had driven 40 miles from a community 2 counties east where something very familiar was beginning to happen. Letters on heavy cream paper claimed jurisdiction. Fines. She set a folder of letters on the desk and looked at Marcus with the expression of someone who has decided. After a long private deliberation to trust, she said, "My grandson told me to find you." Marcus looked at the letters. He looked at her. Her hands were the hands of someone who had worked land their whole life. He said, "Tell me about your property." She said, "My great-grandmother purchased it in 1919. We have the deed." He said, "Good, that's exactly where we start." He called Diane Worthy that evening. He said, "I think we need to talk about expanding the fund's reach." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I've been waiting for you to say that. There is a particular kind of person that systems built on arrogance consistently fail to account for. Not the loudest person, not the one who announces themselves, the one who has spent a long time understanding exactly how things work, who is patient in the particular way of people who know what patience is for, who carries in their hands something that looks ordinary to anyone who hasn't taken the time to look carefully, and which is in fact evidence of everything. Renata Holloway Birch had driven onto 412 acres of Georgia farmland and seen what she expected to see. Work boots, a porch that needed paint, a shirt worn at the collar, an elderly man alone on rural land. She had assembled from those details the story she already intended to tell, and she had begun to act on that story before she confirmed a single fact of it. That is what arrogance is, finally, not cruelty, though cruelty was part of it. It is the decision to stop gathering information because you have decided you already know. She did not know about 22 years. She did not know about Ernest's 11 years at the cotton compress and the bank that said no 3 times and the 412 acres purchased anyway. She did not know about Lynette Morrow or Diane Worthy or the 11 days or the 2 warrants or the 12 investigators across 3 agencies who had been building something quietly while she had been scheduling a second visit to a property she did not own. She did not know that the calm of a man who has done this kind of work for a very long time is not the calm of a man who has given up. It is the calm of a man who is absolutely certain. If this story found you, if you have known land that carried meaning, or a family that built something the world tried to take from them, or a moment where staying quiet was the easier choice, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you're here for what comes next. And tell me this: have you ever been dismissed because of how you looked, what you wore, where you came from, how you talked? Have you ever had someone look at you and decide they already knew everything they needed to know? What did you do with that? Leave it in the comments. I read every one of them. Here's what really gets me about this story. And I've thought about it a lot. It's not the fraud. Fraud is ugly, but it's legible. People do things for money. You can trace the money. Eventually the trail ends somewhere you can point to. It's not even the arrogance, though that was something. That was a specific, concentrated kind of something. What gets me is the box. She picked it up. She turned it over in her hands like she was appraising something at a garage sale. And when she was done, she did not put it back where she had found it. She set it on the railing of the porch, carelessly, because she had already decided it was worth nothing, and she turned away. And it fell. And she watched it fall. And she stepped over the medals, 2 bronze stars from a man who went to Korea at 21 and came home and spent 11 years at a cotton compress and built 400 acres of something that mattered, and she walked down the steps and got in her car. And Marcus Calhoun knelt down on the porch his grandfather built, on the land his grandfather bought with 11 years of Saturdays. And he picked up each one. That is the whole story. Not the warrants, not the 41 months, not the 2.3 million. The whole story is a man kneeling on his own porch in the quiet after something has been done to him and picking up what was dropped and deciding what to do next. Ernest Calhoun planted 400 longleaf pines in 1963 because he believed the trees would outlast him. He was right. They're still there. They'll be standing long after every name in this story has been forgotten, rooted in the same red clay Georgia ground that he turned by hand, doing what trees do, which is hold. So here's my question, and I want the real answer, not the easy one. When you have seen something wrong, not to you, to someone near you, someone quieter than you, someone with less standing than you, someone who maybe didn't know they could say no, did you say something, or did you look at your plate? Tell me. I'll be here